struggling with some difficult schemas about not being good enough and inferiority triggers the usual facial expressions for people and interpersonal interactions. I notice my attention is all inside on this difficult emotion, and perhaps I even dissociate to the point that I'm just not present. Just wondering if you have any useful tips to train my attention to come back to the present moment when I do it. It feels like an uphill battle, and it feels like a failure schema gets triggered as well because I'm not fixing myself. Yeah, I think, this can relate to social anxiety. We can kind of pick up on cues on people's faces and how we're responding, how we're reacting. And, it can be part of OCD as well to be sort of hyper aware of these things and get caught in cycles. And it's tough and it's very distracting. I mean, I think the number one would be using this experience as an alarm clock to start using your skills. So as soon as you notice this schema being triggered, and schemas are deep thought patterns and beliefs that relate to our kind of attachment history, genetics, and they're kind of internal working models, if you like, of how we approach relationships in the world, and, strong sort of thought and fear patterns for anyone who doesn't know what schemas are about. So when that gets triggered, starting to acknowledge that my mind is starting to become hyper aware of that, and then probably become quite self-critical, I would imagine, from what you're saying. So we want to start getting diffusion in there. So right away, I'm noticing that I'm judging that. Then we want to get a lot of compassion in there to say that, okay, it's tough for me right now in social connection. And, I'm feeling my mind starting to judge me and judge my performance and how I'm doing. And actually, that's really tough. And, I can be kind to myself here. So getting that compassionate self-talk going as you're listening to someone, as you're interacting, just noticing, diffusing from the self-judgment, and then getting a compassionate voice to say, okay, this is tough right now, but I can be with this. This schema is being triggered. I notice it. I'm going to do my best to focus and engage and connect. And, a bit of psychoeducation from anxiety studies. We know that people with social anxiety bias towards micro emotion expressions that are seemingly negative, and we over-predict judgment. If we experience social anxiety, we actually over-predict judgment. And so sometimes we're picking up cues that look like someone judging us, but actually they are completely different. So, we see someone's face kind of scowling at something we've said, and in actual fact, they are just concentrating, trying to understand us, or they're distracted. They're getting caught in something in their own mind. They're daydreaming, they're wandering, and it's not about us. It's about their own lack of focus or lack of, attention skills. A lot of people are bad listeners out there. And if you're someone with social anxiety, you notice everyone is a bad listener, and it becomes, it's something about me. So we've got to watch that, we're over biasing and over predicting how much people are judging us. And often they're in their own head and they're distracted, or they're bad listeners, or they're trying to listen, but something's stressing them, or they're trying to understand. They can't quite follow us, something like that. So remembering that can be helpful. And then actually people will judge us as well. And just being ready for that it's okay to be judged. Actually, it's a hard thing for a lot of us. I've certainly struggled with in the past, that sense of being judged by other people. And yet we know people will do it. A lot of people will, there'll be some people out there that are very kind and compassionate and not very judgmental. And you probably know when you're around them because you feel safe and you just feel more relaxed and more like yourself. Then there'll be a chunk of people that have some automatic judgment, but they're working hard to try and not judge you and try and be kind and compassionate, and they're easy to be with. And then there'll be a small chunk of people that are very judgmental. And, I know people like this. I've worked with people like this in therapy. And, there are people out there that that's their defense against their own vulnerability. So they walk into a room and feel very anxious, and they defend against that by looking around the room and starting to judge everyone and go, that person's stupid, that person's ugly, and that person's this and that, and boring, and all of this sort of stuff. So often that's a defense against vulnerability, or it's like a social strategy because of insecurity, and they're wanting to find the most dominant person in the social hierarchy and then push others down. So I think getting compassion in there, try to move towards the people who are more non-judgmental and more supportive and kind, and be with those people where you can, and the people in the middle who are working to be more kind and accepted, and just be careful around the judgmental, difficult people, because they often have quite problematic patterns in relationships. Their schemas can be quite difficult. So you're talking about your kind of schema about not being good enough. You might have someone, that might be blending with a schema of sort of dominance and attack and criticism and, like narcissism and things like that in relationship. And those kind of schemas can bounce off each other and be quite difficult. So you might want to think, can I move, out there towards like other people and find, other people out in the world, and really just working your skills. I think you've got it. The way you describe the question actually sounds like you're starting to really notice this pattern, and you're noticing that it's distracting you. So really trying to use it as a cue to refocus and engage, and seeing attention as a practice, something that we can cultivate. And I'm really passionate about this because I think I'm a good example of this, because when I was young, when I was in school and university and through that time, I could not listen at all. Like my mind was gone. I'd either be stuck in OCD cycles and be obsessing and ruminating and all stuck in mental compulsions, or I'd be obsessing about my interests, and my mind would just be jumping onto the things I was interested in. And I'd find it really hard to listen to people and focus and take in what they were doing. And sometimes what you're describing as well, the kind of inferiority schemas and social anxiety schemas would be triggered as well, and judgment and all of that. But through practice, through mindfulness training, and then bringing that into personal relationships and training that attention, now I can work with large numbers of people in a day, and I'll be as focused with the last person as the first person, and my attention doesn't drift away very often now, really seldom. But it's only through training. So really just being kind with yourself now and seeing, okay, this is my goal right now, this is the thing I'm going to work on, and I'm going to train this skill, and let's see what happens. If I identify it as a goal, every morning I wake up, I think to myself, okay, when I feel that, inferiority schema being triggered, I'm going to diffuse from the thoughts. I'm going to put a little compassion in there, and then I'm going to refocus on the person and what they're saying, and or on what I'm saying, and trying to the other thing we can do actually is this idea of acting by our values rather than our feelings. So with something like an inferiority schema, it's going to make you more submissive in your body language. You're going to probably be quieter. Eye contact might drop, and actually the really tragic thing about this is that this might mean people don't listen to you as well, because you're not speaking with a tone and a body language that will engage people and hold their attention. So this is a really difficult thing, I think, with social anxiety, that social anxiety makes you quieter and more introverted, and then people don't listen as well to you because of that, and because they're distracted, the stuff I said earlier. And then that reinforces the sense of people don't find me interesting, or they don't want to talk to me. So sometimes we have to go, okay, I'm going to try to practice acting by my values rather than that feeling of anxiety. So I'm going to try to speak, from my abdomen, and, try to slow down and take my time and not rush what I'm saying, and, do this mindfulness technique of watch your mouth. So you put your attention on the words that you're saying. You try to really convey them. You notice in the moment how they're landing. You're more present. And the nice thing is that typically when you start to do this, people do listen to you more. That's certainly my experience. It's not perfect. You still have people out there that are hopeless listeners or caught up in their own mind, or are judging you. But if you can kind of cultivate and train that, it can be helpful. So yeah, I hope that was useful as an idea. Some things to try, so really using it as an alarm clock to come back to your skills, trying to associate with the people who are more supportive and non-judgmental, accepting that some people will be judging you, and it may trigger this schema, and you can try to bring compassion to that and see where you get to. The resources for attention training, I would say any of the practices that I've got on the mindfulness circle, all of them you're training attention, because the most basic thing in all the mindfulness practices, you notice your mind wander and you come back. I think the ACT skills, the compassion skills, you get more for your money than just a basic meditation practice. I think you're working more targeted skills. So I think they're going to help. But you could for sometimes with clients for basic attention training, I will do something like, excuse me, like mindfulness of breathing and just working that, or body scanning, or, something that's a single focus. I think sometimes that can be helpful we'll try to send the links out to some of this afterwards. But if you look at, I'll put it in the chat. If you look at them and then, so we play this. So I think, the way I would say for what to practice for attention is any of the practices that we're using, you're going to practice, you're going to train it. But we don't want to only train it sitting in meditation, because then we get context dependent learning where the skills don't generalize as much. So you want to do some practice sitting or, moving but on your own, and then bring the practice into communication with other people and practice that attention. And I found that combination. So it was my mindfulness practice in stillness plus having a goal to bring that into interpersonal relationships that really built that skill. So you can kind of do a bit of both, I would say. But yeah, you could do drop-in anchor, you could do urge surfing, you could do something like mindfulness of breathing, body scanning, loving kindness, compassion practices of training attention. Any of these things, you're going to train your attention, and also having the goal, the intention in my life, I'm going to practice this and train this and get better at it. So yeah, really good question. Really appreciate that question. I think it will be relevant to lots of people struggling with OCD, because this is a more social anxiety. But most people I've worked with OCD often have a chunk of social anxiety there, or the OCD is making interpersonal things difficult. So there's going to be some overlap there.